Well, the job seeker checkbook closed on Sunday. Yesterday, we had this ridiculous lockdown in Brisbane. Businesses, as I've said, will now struggle to survive. Many will shut their doors. What it means simply is $90 billion of welfare being taken out of the economy. 500,000 businesses benefited since it was introduced last March. For many, and think of the 27,000 businesses in Brisbane, there's no income now, no paying customers, so no jobs. That's putting it bluntly. The Treasury Secretary, Steve Kennedy, warned last week up to 150,000 jobs and 110,000 small businesses are at risk. Now, I'm not suggesting these subsidies should continue. What I'm suggesting is what Professor James Allan, the Garrick Professor of Law at the University of Queensland, is suggesting that the initial disproportionate response to the virus has now seen us land in a mountain of debt. Let me just repeat some simple stats. At all times, over 90% of cases worldwide were mild. Government here swallowed the alarmism, propagated, of course, by the ABC, whose guru told us there'd be 70 to 80,000 cases in April alone last year. We've had 29,000 in 14 months, 909 deaths. The Australian road toll last year was 1,190. If real statistics are to mean anything, 3,571 people in Australia suicided last year, almost 4 times the number of COVID deaths and at a much younger age. The influenza toll was 4,363, almost 5 times the COVID deaths. Why aren't we locked down because of influenza? 510 people a week die from heart disease. When can we get some perspective? Why can't we be given real facts and then be trusted to make our own decisions about risk? We've got 25 million people in this country. As at February, fewer than 29,000 have tested positive. That's 0.1% of the population. And 0.0036% have died. Professor James Allan, in a brilliant piece recently, described the response to coronavirus as, quote, the worst public policy decision-making of the last few centuries. And he rightly says in any liberal democracy, you need to have a prima facie presumption against heavy-handed authoritarianism. But as he says, instead, we've had the biggest inroads on our civil liberties for over 200 years. If you're going to tear up the principles, as he and I have been saying for months, of a free and democratic society, Professor James Allan says you need to take 5 decision-making steps. He joins me. James Allan, thank you for your time. Question 1, is the damage from lockdowns, that is, missed cancer checks, suicide, the health effects of massive debt, is the damage from all of these things less or more than if you shunned lockdowns? Professor Allan.
Well, thanks for having me again, Alan. And I obviously think it's more. The lockdowns are going to have long-lasting effects. 33,000 excess deaths in the UK because of the lockdown themselves. And it'll take a few years to pan out. But I think the first thing you ask yourself is the cost of the lockdowns versus the cost of no lockdown. And I know that Australians tend to look up at countries in the Northern Hemisphere and they go, oh, we locked down and they've got all sorts of deaths. But what you need to realize is that within Europe itself, Sweden, which did basically nothing, is about the 20th, the 21st in terms of deaths per million.
Correct.
And Britain had brutal lockdowns, and they're one of the top ones. And so is France, and so is Italy. So people just move. Australians tend to move from, well, we had lockdowns, therefore they must work.
That's it.
But there's fair numbers of studies that show they don't really do that much.
Absolutely. The costs of all of this are far greater than vendor. I should say to our viewers, yes, Professor Allan's in Queensland. He's in lockdown, so consequently can't go into Australia. It's amazing. Question 2.
Amazing.
Are there alternatives?
6 deaths in Queensland.
Yeah, I know. Are there alternatives, question 2, which work quite well? If their answer is no, well, perhaps you need lockdowns. But we've proven that there are alternatives. Sweden, 20th in Europe in deaths per million.
Yes, and I think one that's even better is if you look in the US with states that basically haven't locked down and states that have, there's lots of cross comparisons, but Florida, almost nothing in terms of lockdown for at least half a year. And they've had far fewer deaths per million than New York.
That's it.
And they're about the same as California. So the climate is about the same. Or look at Texas or compare South Dakota to the states around it. And again, when you look at it at the sort of meta level, it's very difficult to see any evidence that the heavy-handed lockdowns are doing anything.
Correct. In other words, you and I have been saying, tell the people the facts, stress who are vulnerable, and let the rest choose for themselves. Question 3, we don't lock people up to prevent flu deaths or car accidents. So is the balance between imposing lockdowns and destroying civil liberties attractive? There's no cost-benefit analysis. We're talking about 900 deaths in 14 months. It's not the Spanish flu.
It's not the Spanish flu, where somewhere between 5 and 10% of people who caught it died, or the plague, the Black Death, which was upwards of a third. We're looking at, not in places in Europe, in the US, about 0.3, 0.27% of people who catch it die. Not great. It's definitely bad, but it's nothing like those other things. The average age of death is older than the life expectancy. And
of course, the thing is, we've got debt now that'll take generations to pay back. Question 4, is the damage spread equitably? And if not, lockdowns should be out. As you say, World War I, World War II, nearly everyone had skin in the game. Politicians' kids were in the military being killed. Everyone was being bombed. But here, the epidemiologists, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the people making the decisions, no skin in the game.
This one really annoys me. I just cannot believe that our politicians didn't take a pay cut. They were just deeming some businesses non-essential. And a lot of those people are going to not just lose their livelihood and their business, they'll end up losing the family home, which they put down to guarantee the mortgage.
Yep.
And, it's been disgraceful. Public servants are coming out of this better. Billionaires are making money through the whole lockdown. And, it's just been a disgrace how inequitably it's been badly distributed. Inequitable between young and old.
Yeah, swathes of people in small business in the private sector lose their business and their family home. A private sector recession. You make the point, no lockdown should ever be allowed where the decision makers aren't paying the same costs as the costs they're imposing. The final question, 5, are there fail-safes built in to end these lockdown measures as soon as possible? I mean, before we put them in, have we built down how to get out?
And we know the answer is no. And in fact,
No.
Australia is particularly badly placed, because how are we ever going to open our international borders if you lock down for 5 cases? We're going to have cases for decades. So I find the whole thing, it's astoundingly bad. And people, of course, you can make it look like the economy is doing fine if you double the national debt in a year, but you can't keep doing that.
So there we are, the 5 questions. 1, is the damage from the lockdowns less than the damage created? You can't answer that, yes. 2, is there no alternative that would work alternatively well? That can't be answered as yes. 3, does the balance between imposing lockdowns and destroying civil liberties look attractive? You couldn't answer yes to that. We don't lock down to prevent flu deaths. 4, the professor says, is the damage spread more or less equitably? You can't answer yes to that. 5, are there fail-safes built in to end these lockdowns? We'll ask Palaszczuk now. Obviously not. You can't answer yes to that. Professor James Allan, thank you for your time and your insights. Great to talk.
Thank you, Alan. And, maybe I'll get out of this by Easter. Thank you very much.
I hope